Hello everybody, my name is Monica Barrera and I am going to be telling you about the time I crossed the US border illegally. But before, let me give you a little bit of history behind some of the reasons why we crossed the border. I was born in Mexico City, Mexico. My mom was a teacher and my dad was a very well paid welder. He used to work for Pemex. They were doing very well. I used to attend a private school. We used to go on vacation a lot. But one day, my dad was told to go work at another city called Toluca, which is on the outskirts of Mexico City, or at least it used to be on the outskirts of Mexico City. So due to the move to this new place, my mom had to quit her job. After we had settled and lived in Toluca for a while, the economy in Mexico got really bad. It got worse than what it was before, and my dad was laid off. And but confident about his reputation and his skills, he went out looking for a job. The day after day, he would come home with no job. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. But sometimes my dad would do little side jobs here and there, welding a gate or making a gate, welding a window or fixing a blender. He even started doing things he didn't even know how to do before. He had to learn them so that he can make some money, to feed his family. But he wasn't getting the same type of money that he used to get. So we ran out of money and my family was broke. Sometimes we didn't even have money to buy food. My mom applied for government help and they gave us cheese and milk once a week. Sometimes the milk would be green and I'm not sure why the milk was green sometimes, but it wasn't bad. The landlords, wherever we used to live, they would give us time to pay the rent, but they also needed money, so we had to move out, and we moved out. We moved very often. I am the oldest of my siblings, but the youngest sibling, my youngest baby sister, she was born with spinal bifida. Due to her condition, she was paralyzed from the waist down, and she also had a bubble where her spinal cord separated. She used to have a bubble on her back full of spinal fluid. And my mom even made her a little mattress with a hole in the middle so we can lay her facing up. The situation got really bad. My little sister would cry because she was hungry, and we didn't have money for milk or formula. So I used to go out in the fields and collect wild chamomile flowers, and we used to make them tea so that we can give it to my sister. But my baby sister, of course, later after drinking her tea, she would cry again because she was still hungry. One day my baby sister got really sick and my parents took her to the hospital in Toluca. But her situation was not good, so they were transferred to Mexico City, a big hospital in Mexico City. My grandmother stayed with us while my dad and my mom left us. One night, my dad came home by himself, and confused, I asked my dad, where was my mom and my sister? And that's when he gave me the bad news that my sister had actually passed away. The members of the church collected some money for us to have a funeral and a burial for her. And I still remember the day we buried my sister. We were at the cemetery and this black hearse came, parked next to us, and they unloaded her casket. Her casket was made of wood and covered with this white piece of fabric. It was very cheap, just made to look a little bit nice, so they covered it with white fabric, but you could still see the wood at the edges of the fabric. My dad asked me if I wanted to see my sister to say goodbye, and I said yes. When he opened the casket, my sister was there. She was little. She was only a year old when she passed away. Her skin was very pale, and for some reason parts of her face were dark blue. Her lips and her mouth were sewn shut, and she had cotton inside her ears, her nostrils, and her mouth. So after well, now that I'm a mom, I cannot even imagine what my mom must have been going through. Not only losing a child, but not having the money to give her proper burial, in a nice casket. But anyway, so after the burial, a friend of my dad told him, hey, well, let's go work in the United States. So my dad didn't want to leave his family behind, of course. So he consulted with my mom, and they both decided that it was a good idea to try it. There was no work in Mexico, and my dad had a skill. So my dad decided to go. But this is another little part of the story. A long time ago, when my mom and my dad were teenagers, I don't know how, but they both got visas, permanent visas for the United States. All they needed was a passport. So my dad got his passport, and he was able to cross legally into the United States. So my dad left to work to the United States, and my mom's and my siblings and I stayed behind. While my dad was in the United States, my mom had to try to get us passports and visas for my siblings and I. After countless meetings, countless fees, paperwork, our visas were denied time after time after time. We could not get a visa. So a few months later, my dad sent us some money so that we could move to Tijuana, which is a city right on the border of Mexico and California. So his plan was that to cross us illegally. So my mom and my younger brother crossed the border. It was amazing because my mom crossed legally. My brother didn't have a visa or a passport, but because he was so young, I guess maybe they didn't see him when he crossed over the desk. I'm not sure, but he crossed. So it was just my sister and myself. My sister was, I believe, 9, and I was 12. So my dad had left the car on the side of the U.S. so that we can use as soon as we cross the border. So that night, we waited for the sun to go down, and we walked the chain link fence. Back then, there was a chain link fence, and we found a hole in the fence. So we entered the hole, and it's very weird to think about it because one minute I was in Mexico on the sidewalk, and you could hear the cars passing next to me and people talking. The next minute, as soon as I cross or enter the hole, I'm in a desert. And it's dry, and it's dark, and it's quiet. Really quiet. So I guess that night it was just my dad, my sister, and myself crossing the border. It was just us in the desert. My sister and I ran behind my dad as he made his way through little dry washes and bushes and little hills. And it seemed like we went forever, but it was only about 30 minutes. It took us 30 minutes to cross the border. And just like that, we were in a busy street on the side of the United States. We were very happy that we had made it. My dad took us to the car. We got in the car, and we were driving on the freeway on our way to Los Angeles. But we didn't know that on the freeway on our way to Los Angeles, there was another immigration stop. So we were not prepared for that second immigration stop. And I guess the immigration officer must have sensed something was up, or maybe he saw our faces. But he asked my dad to pull over to the side because they were going to do an inspection. And that's when they found out that we were crossing the border illegally. So they pretty much arrested us, and they impounded my dad's car. They put my dad in a cell with all the other men. And my sister and I were put in a cell with only women, but we were separated. We could not see each other. Like, I could not see my dad. And my dad, being so overprotective of us, he would yell my name and my sister's name, asking if we were okay. And the immigration officers would tell him to be quiet, stop yelling. We did not have any food the whole entire time we were there. We were there that night and most of the next day. And at one point I asked an officer if they had any food or water. They gave me a tin cup with water, but they said they couldn't give me any food. They didn't have any food. So maybe the officer felt bad for me and my sister because we were the only kids in the cell. He later came back with a piece of sandwich, like a ham sandwich and a banana for my sister and I. So later that afternoon, or the next day that afternoon, they called one by one everybody that was in the cell, and they were taking pictures, fingerprints, and getting all of our information. They loaded us into a bus and they took us back to the border, to the city of Tijuana. And so we got out of the bus and we walked across into Mexico. After we had crossed, my dad took us to eat because we were starving. Now we didn't have a car and we didn't have any more money. But my dad wanted to go back that same night. We were going to cross again. So we waited for the sun to go down again. And we made ourselves our way on the sidewalk, found a hole. But this time, it wasn't just us crossing the border. Actually, right before, as I was making myself, I was about to go into the hole in the chain link fence. This lady actually cut me off, and her and her son went in front of me. There was a lot of people crossing the border that night. I felt a little bit relieved because it wasn't just us. It wasn't that scary anymore. So we were running again, me and my sister, behind my dad, following his steps. And then out in the distance, I hear this familiar sound. And this sound was a helicopter, and the helicopter was coming our way. So everybody started running everywhere. Everybody scattered and trying to hide behind the bushes or some rocks or in some riverbed. And at one point the helicopter was flying almost on top of us, and they had the spotlight, I'm gonna say about 100 feet from us, from where we were hiding. So after the helicopter, I don't remember how they left or how we ended up following this young man, but we made our way we finally crossed into the US, and we were hiding under some stairs with these two guys that we had met. While we were hiding, we were waiting for the sun to come out and for more people to be out so that we would blend in with other people. While we waited, I could see a Denny's restaurant across the street, and I could smell the food, and it smelled so good. I was tired and I was cold. That night was very, very cold. And I didn't have a jacket, I just had a sweater. So I put my sweater over my knees and I was trying to fall asleep, but the cold was not letting me sleep. So the sun came out and there was people in the street, so we finally got out of our hiding spot. The young men offered my dad their apartment. They told him we could spend some days there while we eat something and rested, and then we continue our journey. My dad agreed, so that morning the guys took us to their apartment, and they actually went to work that same day. It's like they did this often, so it was weird. Anyway, so we rested. When the guys came back from work, they gave us food, which was really, really nice of them. And they also told my dad that the train that goes from San Clemente, which is the city where we were at, to Los Angeles, immigration did not stop that train. So we decided that the next day we were going to take that train. But we needed to change our clothes because our clothes were dirty from the desert. So the next day my dad went to the secondhand store and bought us some dresses and some shoes for me and my sister. And we waited for the young guys to come from work, and we thanked them for their help, and we left. We went to the train station, we bought our tickets to Los Angeles, and we got on the train. the train ride was actually not bad at all. It was pretty good, and it was actually a very short ride. But the whole entire time I was worried about immigration getting on the train and asking us for our papers. But no, they didn't show up on the train. We made it all the way to LA. In LA, well, my brother and my mom were already waiting for us. So while we were living in LA, I would hear in the news how immigration would stop random people on the street and asking them about their green card, the residency card or citizenship card. I didn't have one, and I didn't want immigration to stop me in the street and ask me for my papers. So I wanted to learn English fast. I wanted to pass as a U.S. citizen. So if an immigration officer stopped me, I would pass as a U.S. citizen. So 6 months after crossing the border, and of course I was already attending middle school, I was already pretty fluent in English. I could defend myself very well. And so I continued learning English and trying to not have an accent, even though I still do, very heavy. But immigration laws at the time did not allow us to change our immigration status. It actually took 10 years before I was granted a work permit. It's a card that tells me or tells somebody else or someone that wants to hire me that I'm allowed to work in the US. But this was only after 10 years of trying and about $4,000 in fees. And of course meetings with the immigration officers, fingerprints and all that stuff. And then it took 11 years for me from crossing the border actually, to get my residency. Of course, more money, more fees. And it took 15 years after I crossed the border to get my citizenship. But the immigration story is a whole other story because during the process of changing my legal status, our immigration officer, the one in charge of our case, wanted me to go to Mexico and continue my process from there. But I was already married here. I had a job, my husband had a job, and I was pregnant. And of course, with the insurance for my husband, I would see my gynecologist. So how was I going to get medical help in Mexico without insurance? And how was my husband going to work here while I live over there, and he's paying for 2 households pretty much? So we had to fight my immigration officer. It took a few months to convince her that it wasn't a good idea to send me to Mexico to continue with my process until I finally was approved. So this is a story about me crossing the border. I don't think about it as a bad story or as a heartbreaking story. None of these stories. I actually think of them as an adventure, and I take them as a guide during my life, that I can do anything. If I fall, I can get up and try it again. So that's it. Thank you.